April 1863. The White House. While a nation tears itself apart in the bloodiest war in American history, one man lies awake in the darkness, haunted by visions he cannot escape. Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, the savior of the Union, is being destroyed from within, not by Confederate bullets, not by political enemies, but by his own mind. Tonight, we descend into Lincoln's nightmares. We'll uncover the documented terrors that plagued America's most iconic president. Dreams of his own death, visions of catastrophe, psychological torment so severe his closest advisors feared for his sanity. This is the story history tried to forget, the private hell of Abraham Lincoln. To understand Lincoln's nightmares, we must first understand the man. Born in a one-room cabin in Kentucky, 1809, Abraham Lincoln entered a world of hardship. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, died when he was just 9 years old, likely from milk sickness, a brutal frontier disease. But even as a boy, Lincoln was different. His stepmother, Sarah Bush Lincoln, later recalled, "Abe was the best boy I ever saw. He never gave me a cross word." Yet neighbors remembered something else, a child prone to profound melancholy, what they called the blues. Lincoln himself once wrote, "I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on earth." He was 27 years old. The darkness had already taken root. January 1835, New Salem, Illinois. 25-year-old Abraham Lincoln is in love with Anne Rutledge, the daughter of a local tavern keeper. Then, without warning, Anne falls ill with typhoid fever. Within days, she's dead. What happened next shocked the community. Lincoln, according to multiple witnesses, suffered a complete psychological collapse. His law partner, William Herndon, later wrote, "Lincoln went insane. His friends were compelled to keep watch over him. They removed all knives and razors from his possession. They feared he would take his own life." For weeks, Lincoln wandered the woods, incoherent, unable to work. His friend Henry Whitney recalled, "I have seen Lincoln in his room, lying on his bed, face down, weeping like a child." This wasn't mere grief. This was something deeper, something that would shadow him for the rest of his life. Fast forward to 1861. Lincoln is now president. The nation is at war with itself, and Lincoln has begun documenting something extraordinary: his dreams. According to his personal secretary, John Hay, Lincoln kept careful records of his nightmares. Most were lost or destroyed, but some survived. One recurring dream haunted him constantly. Lincoln described walking through the White House at night, following the sound of weeping. Room after room, empty. The crying grows louder. Finally, he enters the East Room. There, he sees a corpse on a catafalque, surrounded by mourners in black. He approaches. He asks a soldier, "Who is dead in the White House?" The soldier replies, "The president. He was killed by an assassin." Lincoln had this dream multiple times. He told his wife, Mary. He told his cabinet. Ward Hill Layman, his close friend and bodyguard, documented it in detail. The President of the United States was dreaming of his own assassination 3 years before it happened. Today, mental health experts have studied Lincoln's documented symptoms. Dr. Joshua Schenck, in his book Lincoln's Melancholy, argues that Lincoln suffered from clinical depression, what was called melancholia in the 19th century. But there's more. Sleep researchers at Stanford University analyzed Lincoln's dream patterns based on historical accounts. They concluded he likely suffered from severe sleep disorders, possibly including night terrors, sleep paralysis, and prophetic dream syndrome. His recurring nightmares showed patterns consistent with PTSD. But PTSD from what? The war hadn't traumatized him yet. Some researchers believe Lincoln's childhood trauma, his mother's death, frontier violence, poverty, created a psychological vulnerability. Others point to genetic factors. Lincoln's father was described as melancholic. His mother was known for profound sadness. The darkness may have been inherited. September 17, 1862. Antietam. The single bloodiest day in American history. 22,717 casualties in 12 hours. Lincoln receives the telegram. He reads the numbers, and something inside him breaks further. Secretary of State William Seward later wrote, "The president's anguish was terrible to behold. He bore the grief of a nation on his shoulders, and it was crushing him." Lincoln began visiting hospitals. He walked among the wounded and dying. He held their hands. He wept openly. His secretary, John Nicolai, noted, "The president sleeps only 2 or 3 hours per night. He paces the hallways until dawn." The nightmares intensified. He dreamed of drowning in blood. He dreamed of endless rows of coffins. He dreamed of his own son's deaths. And then his nightmares came true. February 20th, 1862. Lincoln's 11-year-old son Willie dies of typhoid fever in the White House, the same disease that killed Anne Rutledge, the same preventable illness that claimed thousands in the unsanitary conditions of Washington, D.C.
According to witnesses, Lincoln walked to his son's bedside, lifted the boy's lifeless body, and whispered, "My poor boy, he was too good for this earth. It is hard, hard to have him die." Then the President of the United States collapsed to the floor, weeping uncontrollably. For weeks, Lincoln couldn't work. He would lock himself in the room where Willie died and sob for hours. His Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, said, "I have never seen a man so broken by grief." Mary Todd Lincoln descended into madness, conducting seances to contact their dead son. Lincoln attended at least one. But Lincoln's nightmares grew worse. Now he dreamed not just of his own death, but of his children's, of Mary's, of everyone he loved being torn away. Sleep became his enemy, and yet exhaustion demanded he surrender to it, night after terrible night. By 1863, Lincoln's physical appearance shocked visitors. He'd lost 30 pounds. His face was gaunt, hollowed, deep lines carved into his skin. One visitor said he looked like a man being slowly tortured to death. He was only 54 years old. But something else was happening. Lincoln began telling people he wouldn't live to see the end of his presidency. In November 1863, after the Gettysburg Address, he told Ward Hill Layman, "I had a dream of being on a boat, moving rapidly toward a dark and distant shore." In 19th century dream interpretation, this meant death. Ohio Senator James Ashley later testified, "President Lincoln told me he felt he would not outlive his term. He said it with such certainty, I believed him." Lincoln had become convinced his nightmares were prophetic. He was dreaming the future, his own future. November 6, 1860, the night Lincoln was elected president. He returned to his bedroom in Springfield, exhausted. He laid down on a sofa, and then he saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Lincoln later described it to multiple people, including his wife and Ward Hill Layman. He looked across the room at a mirror. There he saw his reflection, but it was doubled, 2 faces, side by side. One face was his normal reflection, the other was pale, ghastly, like a corpse. Lincoln was terrified. He stood up, and the image vanished. He laid back down, it returned. He tried several times, the same result. He called Mary into the room. She saw it too. She immediately interpreted it as a sign. Lincoln would serve 2 terms as president, but would not survive the second. Lincoln tried to recreate the phenomenon many times afterward. It never appeared again, but he never forgot it. The ghostly double, the death face, the warning. January 1st, 1863. Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation. It's his greatest achievement. It's also his greatest burden, because Lincoln knows that his decision will prolong the war. More death, more suffering. Is he righteous, or is he a monster? In his nightmares, Lincoln sees the faces of those he's freed, but he also sees the faces of the soldiers who will die to make that freedom real. In one recorded dream, he walks through a field of dead soldiers. Each one sits up and asks him, "Was it worth it? Was my life worth your principles?" Lincoln has no answer. Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, met with Lincoln several times. He later wrote, "I saw in Lincoln's face a deep and genuine sadness, the weight of what he'd done, freeing 4 million souls while condemning hundreds of thousands to death. It was destroying him from within." Lincoln told a friend, "I am very unwell. My feet and hands are cold. I suppose I should be in bed, but I cannot sleep. I think the war will never end." This from the man leading the Union to victory. April 1865. Lee has surrendered. The war is over. Lincoln has survived. For the first time in years, he seems at peace. He smiles, he jokes, he speaks of the future. And then he has the dream. On April 11, 1865, Lincoln tells his wife and several friends about a nightmare he had the previous night. He's in the White House. He hears crying again. He walks through the empty corridors. He enters the East Room. There's a catafalque covered with a black cloth, a corpse, mourners weeping. Lincoln approaches and asks a guard, "Who is dead in the White House?" The guard turns and says, "The president. He was killed by an assassin." And then Lincoln looks down at the corpse and sees his own face. Ward Hill Layman begged Lincoln to increase security. The president refused. He said, "If they want to kill me, no amount of guards will stop them. I have seen what's coming." Mary Todd Lincoln later said, "He knew. In his heart, he knew." 3 days later, on April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln attended Ford's Theater. He was watching a comedy called Our American Cousin. At approximately 10:15 p.m., John Wilkes Booth entered the presidential box and fired a single bullet into the back of Lincoln's head. Lincoln was carried across the street to a boarding house owned by William Peterson. They laid him on a bed too small for his tall frame. He lay diagonally. For 9 hours he struggled for breath. His cabinet gathered. His son Robert wept at his bedside. At 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln died. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, standing over the body, spoke the words, "Now he belongs to the ages." But Lincoln already belonged to something else, to the darkness, to the nightmares, to the prophecy he'd carried like a curse. His body was placed on a catafalque in the East Room of the White House. Thousands filed past. The scene was exactly as Lincoln had described in his dream. The black cloth, the mourners, the corpse, everything, except Lincoln wasn't there to see it. He was the corpse.
Ward Hill Layman later wrote, "I am convinced that President Lincoln foresaw his own death. The nightmares were not mere dreams. They were warnings from some unknown realm telling him what was to come. And we who loved him could not save him from a fate he'd already seen." Mary Todd Lincoln never recovered. She'd lost 3 sons, Eddie at age 4, Willie at 11, and Tad in 1871 at age 18. And she'd watched her husband murdered before her eyes. The nightmares that plagued Abraham now consumed Mary. She attended seances regularly, claiming to speak with Lincoln's spirit. She told friends that Abraham visited her at night, warning her of dangers. She heard voices, saw visions. In 1875, her only surviving son, Robert, had her committed to an asylum, declaring her insane. In the asylum, Mary told doctors, "Abraham's nightmares were real. He saw the future, and now I see it too. I see my own death coming." She was released after 3 months, but lived in paranoia and fear until her death in 1882. The Lincoln family's private hell didn't end with assassination. It echoed through generations. Robert Todd Lincoln, the only Lincoln son to survive to adulthood, bore his own curse. He was present at his father's assassination. By tragic coincidence, he was also present at the assassinations of Presidents Garfield in 1881 and McKinley in 1901. 3 presidential assassinations. Robert was there for all of them. Robert later refused all invitations to presidential events, saying he carried ill fortune. He told friends he had nightmares of his father's death every night for decades. The trauma passed down, generation to generation. The Lincoln bloodline ended with Robert's grandson, Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith, who died in 1985. No direct descendants remain. Some historians call it the Lincoln curse, as if the nightmares that plagued Abraham Lincoln poisoned his entire lineage. Tragedy, madness, early death. The private hell became a family legacy. Today, Abraham Lincoln is frozen in marble at his memorial in Washington, D.C. Visitors see strength, resolve, immortality. But if you look closely at Daniel Chester French's sculpture, you see something else. In Lincoln's eyes, there's profound sadness. In his posture, exhaustion. The artist captured what photographs and paintings also reveal. This was a man haunted. The question that haunts researchers is this: were Lincoln's nightmares prophetic? Did he genuinely foresee his own assassination? Or was it tragic coincidence, a depressed man's morbid fantasies that happened by cruel fate to come true? Science offers no answers. Psychology can explain his depression, but not his accuracy. History can document his dreams, but not their meaning. We are left with mystery. A president who saw his death before it came. A man whose private nightmares became public tragedy. Abraham Lincoln saved the Union. He freed 4 million enslaved people. He preserved democracy when it stood on the brink of collapse. But the cost was his own mind, his own peace, his own life. Every night he descended into private hell so that his nation might rise into light. His nightmares were not weakness, they were the price of his greatness, the burden of seeing clearly, too clearly, the cost of his choices. In his darkness he gave us dawn, and perhaps that's the most haunting truth of all. Abraham Lincoln's nightmares were about sacrifice, and he was the sacrifice. Sleep in peace, Mr. President. Your nightmares are finally over.